All right, well, I'm just going to launch right in because it's already 4:20, and I was supposed to start at 4, and I've got a full presentation for you. So anybody else who wants to come on down to listen to, I'm very excited to be here. My name is David Matheson, and I'm really excited to share with you some of the evidence that I believe leads very strongly to the conclusion that all of the myths around the world are connected. From virtually every inhabited continent on our planet and all the islands. From Australia, I found this very specific, not just connected in kind of a, well, people make sacred stories and myths, which they do, but very specific connections. Connections that argue that actually all the myths of every single continent are using the same worldwide, very ancient system. It's like an ancient inheritance that was given to all people. And I've found it operating in the myths from Australia, Africa, very specific. We'll take a look at how specific this is. The Americas, North America, sacred stories from the different nations of North America, Central America, South America, the islands of the Pacific, which are covers a vast area, and the stories of Maui, in the Maya text that remains, the Popol Vuh, and in Europe and in Asia, including the myths from ancient Egypt, ancient India, ancient Japan, ancient China, ancient Greece, the Norse myths, and like I said, the sacred traditions of all the different parts of the world. And that is very, and including all the stories in the Bible, are using the same system. So that's a pretty large claim. And people might be thinking to themselves, how could all the myths be using the same system? I'm not sure, but I'm going to show you some of the evidence. I'm not sure how they're all using the same system. I have some suspicions, but let's take a look at the very specific evidence that is evident in the stories themselves. And I'll start with some from the Bible, but I'll go into Greek myths and some from ancient India, and then finish up with some very specific myths from the Americas, all the way from the West Coast across to the East Coast. And then I'll show how it ties into sacred sites, because I believe it's all doing the same, it's all talking about the same things that the sacred sites are also intended to reinforce and teach us. Okay, so this is a picture from 1340, AD 1340. This is from a Bible story. So this is actually the first one. I was very hesitant. I was very resistant to the idea that all the stories in the Bible, I was okay with the idea that all the myths could be based on the stars. But at the time I was taking the Bible literally, and I was very resistant to the idea that the stories in the Bible could be based on the stars. And when I started to see it was with this story. Does anyone know? This is from 1340, so they did depict people a little bit differently. You might think that this is a young woman, but this is actually a man in the Bible story. Anyone know which Bible story I don't know if you can see it that well, but I do have it on the internet, and I'll make a YouTube video of it. But this is Samson, okay? This is a story of Samson. This is his parents, and he sees a woman down in Timnath, daughter of the Philistines. And he says to his parents, oh, she pleases me well. Get her for me for a wife. And they say, what's the matter with you? Aren't there any, girls in our people that you could marry? And he says, no, she pleases me well. So they go down to Timnath, and on the way, they encounter in the vineyards of Timnath a young lion. And the young lion roars against Samson, and the text says that Samson rips the lion apart, rends the lion as he would a kid, like a young goat. And then he goes down and sees the woman in Timnath. And then it says, after a time, he came back to take her, but he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. And behold, there was a swarm of bees inside the carcass and honey. So he took the honey out of the mouth of the lion, and he gave some to his parents, but he didn't tell them where he got it. It was actually, he was violating, I've heard this taught in church, that he was violating the Nazarite vow. You're not supposed to touch a dead carcass of an animal. So it was probably not something he was supposed to be doing, to be taking the honey out of the mouth. But he made a riddle out of that. He said, out of the eater came something sweet. And he made that as a riddle, and nobody could answer the riddle. And they got very upset at him because he put a bet on the riddle. But anyway, that's the story of Samson. And there's a lot more of the story of Samson that's also based on the heavens. But let's just take a look at this one. This was the very first, actually that and the jawbone. He uses the jawbone of, I don't know what he uses to slay his enemies.
A donkey or jacket.
Yeah, the jawbone of an ass, which is also celestial. So that was the first inkling that I started when I was reading about somebody saying, wait, Samson is actually based on the stars. It was in a text from 1969. I said, well, maybe it happened in the stars and, in terrestrial history as well. But actually, so this is a zodiac wheel. Of course, we could divide the year up into 13 as well. Some people have said, there are actually 13 constellations that the sun crosses through. Ophiuchus being the 13th. The foot of that constellation is along the path of the sun. So there are 13, but this is a 12. But the cycle of the sun's rising goes in this order. This is one from, I think, 1603 or 1613. I forget the exact year. Here's Aries on this old zodiac wheel. Then comes Taurus, Gemini. This is how they depicted Cancer. Looks more like a lobster than a crab there. But after Cancer, so this is actually summer solstice right here in the age of Aries, in between Gemini and Cancer. It's moved a little bit because of precession, but after Cancer, the sun goes into Leo, and then as it's coming down out of the top part of the year, here we are at summer solstice, the sun on its path is the highest in the sky. And after this, the days begin to start getting shorter and shorter again as we head down towards the winter solstice. So as we're heading down, remember Samson was going down to see a woman, he encountered a lion. So here's Leo and here's Virgo. And this is the crossing point. After Virgo is when we start heading down into the lower half of the year at the fall equinox. Okay, and then after a time he came back and he turned aside to see the lion, and he found honey in the mouth of the lion. Now, which zodiac sign would be the pot of honey? Anyone know? There is no, there is none, but there's actually a beautiful, here it is in, unfortunately it's a little washed out, but you can see it. I've put it online, and I will put a recording of this up with the slides where you can see them in your own house, where maybe you can turn the lights down a little bit. But this is the same part of the sky that creates that pattern. The sun rises, here's Gemini, and then as we go around the sun, they move a little bit further and further towards the west each night. So the sun will rise successively in first Gemini, then Cancer, then Leo, and then Virgo. Right in front of Leo is the constellation of Cancer the Crab, and there's a brilliant little cluster inside the head of Cancer the Crab. Anyone know what that is, what it's called? You can see it with the naked eye, but it's kind of hard to see. But it is one of my favorite things to see. A little bit earlier in the year is the best time to see it. It's called the Beehive Cluster. Has anyone ever heard of the Beehive Cluster? It's M47, Messier Object 47. The Beehive Cluster, and you can see it with the naked eye. And this is the lion. I don't know if you can see this. You guys can gather. There's plenty of room, so you can come up front if you want to see. But this is the mouth of the lion. This is the Beehive Cluster. You can find it basically by going halfway between the head of Leo and the twins of Gemini. The twins of Gemini are sinking down in the west right now. You can still see them a little bit above. But and I did it one more time with even zooming in a little closer. So that's where the beehive is. Here it is with the black background. Maybe you can see it a little more clearly. That's the Beehive Cluster. So I believe that Samson story all the way through is actually talking about this celestial motions. And it has to do with spiritual teachings, but it doesn't have to do, I no longer believe it has to do with a literal Samson. but we can move along from that. Here's actually a coin from about 350 BC. This is from Babylon, from the Alexandrine period, after Alexander the Great had gone around conquering other countries. But this is a Babylonian coin. This is actually the god Baal, who's a male figure, but he's actually in the position of Virgo. You see how he's seated here? Virgo is a very distinctive, some of the distinctive aspects of Virgo are she's seated and she has an outstretched arm. And you can see it I'll show you in the constellation in a minute. But on the other side of this coin with Baal in the position of Virgo, the constellation Virgo, and these constellations will sometimes play a male character and sometimes a female character. The same constellation will be a female character, sometimes in the same myth. On the other side of that coin is a lion, and here's a bee right above the lion. So that's very interesting. This connection, you can see ancient artwork where bees are coming out of the mouth of a lion. And I believe that's because of the constellations and that beehive cluster. Here again, here's Virgo. If you can see her, she is often depicted as being on a throne. One time actually, Hera, in Greek myth, she's Hera, the wife of Zeus. She throws her son Hephaestus out of heaven. He's the Vulcan, the smith of the gods, and he makes a chair to punish his mother because he's this amazing metal worker that she can't get up out of until he releases her. So that's because Virgo is often depicted as seated on a chair. In fact, the goddess Isis will have on her head a lot of times this outline that looks like this chair right here, because I believe Isis is associated with this constellation. But moving along, so the Samson connection that I just showed you, you might say, well, that's quite a coincidence. A lion, he's going down to see a woman, lion, beehive, honey. The next one that I read about that really started to make me scratch my head and say, I think maybe the Bible is based on the stars. I didn't realize that before, and then I'm going to have to change my whole worldview. But actually it shows that it's connected to all the other cultures of the world, as opposed to being different from all the cultures of the world as it's sometimes taught, as it's often taught, unfortunately. This is the region of heaven between Sagittarius and Scorpio. Actually, this is where the Milky Way, the brightest part of the Milky Way, comes right up between Sagittarius and Scorpio. And this is Ophiuchus. And there's a passage in Revelation 9 where the fifth angel sounds his trumpet. And anyone know Revelation 9? The star falls down and the keys to the bottomless pit open up and a smoke rises up and it darkens the sky by reason of the smoke cloud. And then what comes out of the smoke? Locusts. This is in Revelation 9. You can read the locusts come out of smoke, and then they're described as, well, these locusts are like horses arrayed for battle, but then they have the tails that have the sting of a scorpion. Well, here we have Sagittarius, here we have Scorpio, here we have the smoke coming up from the bottomless pit. That's the Milky Way. This is the brightest part of the Milky Way. And let me show you the locusts real quick. So I'm zooming in on, if you can see, Sagittarius and Scorpio. This is the outlining system of H.A. Rey. Does anyone know who H.A. Rey is? He's a children's author. He's now deceased. H.A. Rey and his wife Margaret Rey wrote Curious George. And he also wrote a book about how to outline the constellations. He was frustrated with the way they were being outlined. His outlines really opened the door. It was published in 1954. It's still in print. The Stars, A New Way to See Them. So this is how we outline Sagittarius under the H.A. Rey system. But some of you may be familiar with the brightest stars of Sagittarius. There, I've outlined the outline, but the brightest part of Sagittarius is sometimes called the teapot. Has anyone ever heard of the teapot? Right? This is the easiest part of Sagittarius to see. I put it in red. It kind of looks like a teapot. Here's the spout, here's the handle, here's the little lid, or the top. And you can see those are the brightest stars of Sagittarius. Now, I haven't read this anywhere before, but I'm convinced that teapot, when you look at it in the sky, also looks like a locust. It looks like a grasshopper. See this? These are his little antennas. He's got his little... And locusts, in the Old Testament, we have a swarm of locusts in the 10 plagues that's part of the Moses story. And I talk about this in one of my books. It's very clear that Moses is doing his 10 plagues in this region of the sky. In fact, this same teapot is sometimes a cruse of oil for pouring out oil, like anointing with oil in the Bible. So I'll move through the Bible, but I'm just showing that Revelation 9, so Samson is in the Old Testament. Revelation, obviously, is in the so-called New Testament. I think they're all very, very ancient. And this is some system that predates even ancient Egypt. But here's the smoke from the bottomless pit. That's the Milky Way. I've outlined it because you can't see it very well. I thought the white on the white background would be a little easier to see than the black background. But there's another Revelation passage right after it that if you still aren't convinced that the Bible is based on the stars, Revelation 10, another mighty angel appears, and this one has a rainbow on his head, and bless you, and it says right in the text that he plants his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. And this is the constellation Ophiuchus. This is the Milky Way. If I were Ophiuchus, if he was facing you, you see which foot is in the Milky Way. His right foot is in the Milky Way. His left foot is not in the Milky Way. Okay? By the way, his right foot is the one that the sun does pass right through here. So that's why Ophiuchus should be in the zodiac. But right foot is in the Milky Way. Left foot is not. In the text it says his right foot is in the sea, his left foot is on the land. Actually, it says he has a rainbow on his head. I believe that's this triangular shape right up here. Instead of connecting it with a triangle, you could envision kind of an arc. And it also says he's clothed in a cloud. Now, usually this is a serpent bearer. You can believe me or not, but I believe that's why he's wearing a cloud. But the part about his feet, I mean, there are all these clues in the text that we are talking about something that's celestial. And now I go, oh, there's Ophiuchus. I should have clicked one more time. But you can see how his right foot is in the sea, his left foot is on the ground. I'll do one more from the New Testament story of John the Baptist. Okay, when John the Baptist sees Jesus coming to him, he's baptizing in the River Jordan. He calls people, oh, you den of vipers. Okay, den of vipers, I believe is Scorpio again. But which constellation in the zodiac do you think would be John the Baptist, if you just had to guess off the top of your head? Zodiac constellation dunks water. Aquarius, thank you. So this is Aquarius right here. And in John 1:26, he says, behold the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world. Here's Aquarius. This is the outline of Aquarius as envisioned by H.A. Rey. Very hard to see. If you go on Wikipedia, you'll see an outline of Aquarius. It won't help you at all. But H.A. Rey's outlining system helps you. Look at where Aquarius' head, here's his pitcher of water. He's pouring out some water on a fish. Aquarius is looking right towards, this is Aries the ram right here. So Aquarius is saying, behold the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sins of the world. And he says, in John 3:30, he says, he must increase, I must decrease. This is the west, this is the east. Just like the sun, the stars come up in the east, they go across, they go down. These are clues in the text that we are talking about celestial things. And then there's another part where he says, I indeed baptize you with water, but one mightier than I cometh after me, who will baptize you with the Holy Ghost and with fire. One mightier than I, baptize you with the Holy Ghost and with fire. And then he says something strange after that. He says, whose fan is in his hand. You know this passage? Whose fan is in his hand, and he will thoroughly purge his floor and gather his wheat into his garner, but the chaff he will burn with fire unquenchable. So we're talking about separating wheat from chaff with a fan, okay? That's a winnowing fan. There's an actual technique of separating wheat from the chaff with a winnowing fan. This is the constellation Orion. Everyone's probably familiar with Orion. That is the most dazzling belt of stars, very bright constellation. And he has this upraised paddle. These stars aren't very bright, but I believe that is the winnowing fan. And not only do I believe it, I am convinced that that is the winnowing fan, and I'll show you why. So here's a woman winnowing grain even today. Oh, sorry. Here's John baptizing Jesus. So the audience member who said Aquarius, you remember the outline of Aquarius? This is from 1450, AD 1450. There's a painter named Fra Angelico. He was a monk. He was a very talented painter. This is a convention of the way that John the Baptist is almost always depicted. You see how his leg is here? See his hand here? This leg, very, very exaggerated, the way he's depicted. Remember how H.A. Rey outlined Aquarius? the actual outline of these constellations, all the way back to ancient Greece and ancient Egypt, is depicted in the artwork. There's Aquarius. Here's Fra Angelico again. Look at the hands of Jesus. This is also a convention. He almost always has his hands in this fish position, okay? And right underneath Aquarius is actually, I can't go back, but there is a fish. The southern fish is right underneath. Aquarius is pouring out his water right on top of Pisces austrinus, the southern fish. I'm showing the winnowing fan of Orion. This is the winnowing fan here. That upraised paddle. I think this is the woman sorting the grain. Okay, so this is a woman in India. And even today, this is her winnowing. She's dropping the grain onto a poncho there and letting the wind sort the chaff out from the wheat. The wheat kernels are heavier, they fall straight down. The wind will take the chaff a little ways away, and you can sort it out that way. And the passage in the text actually says whose fan is in his hand, and then it talks about winnowing the grain. And you can see how she almost looks like the constellation Orion right here as she's doing that. So the ancient system envisions these different figures and depicts them in myths. All around the world, you can see the very clear connections to the constellations. There's Orion one more time. This is actually a seal from about 2970 BC, 2970 BC. So that'd be 4,900 years ago. This is a 5,000-year-old seal. Look at this figure. This is, identified as King Den is one of the first pharaohs. See how see the position of his legs? It's not the same as Aquarius. This is an Orion figure, and he's about to, club this unfortunate person here, but I don't think you actually have to worry that this violence being depicted here is literal. I believe this is a depiction of the pharaoh in the position of Orion. And actually there is a constellation, a very long constellation that comes right out from the foot of Orion called the river Eridanus. Eridanus, which is Jordan. Jordan and Eridanus are cognate or linguistically similar. And here, let me show you, there's Orion, there's Eridanus. This is only part of Eridanus. It actually keeps going. But see how very close to the leg of Orion? Sometimes it's depicted as flowing out from this toe. This is Rigel right here. But look at this deep kind of knee bend right here in Eridanus. And now look back at that seal. You see how this guy has this deep knee bend right here, and he's clutching his leg right there, right where Eridanus basically originates. So I believe this figure is actually Eridanus. And actually Orion has a bow, and this figure has kind of a long straight club or something. But this system is very ancient. It was already in place when ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia were writing about Gilgamesh. It is in the Gilgamesh stories as well. So very interesting in ancient Greece. If you're familiar with the Odyssey of Homer, the Odyssey, Odysseus, on his journeys, he has to go down to the underworld. Circe, whose name actually Circe is related to our word for circle. Circe is a female, like goddess of great power who sends him on. She says, Odysseus, you can't be finished with your journey till you go down to the underworld and you visit with Tiresias, as he's going to tell you something that you need to know. And Odysseus says, I don't want to go to the underworld. And she says, sorry, you have to go. So she gives Odysseus very clear instructions. She says, you're going to have to sacrifice a ram. You have to promise to sacrifice a heifer, which is a cow, and not a cow that hasn't had a calf yet, and a ram. You can promise that to the dead, and then they'll come. But for Tiresias, you have to sacrifice a ram and a ewe, and you have to turn their heads away, and then when you slaughter them, you turn your head away. Okay? And then Tiresias will come. And then Tiresias gives this prophecy to Odysseus where he says, you have to go carrying your oar over your shoulder until you go so far away from the sea that the people don't know about the ocean, and they ask you why you have a winnowing fan on your shoulder. Remember the winnowing fan? We just saw John the Baptist say, winnowing fan, his fan is on his shoulder. The Odyssey was written about 800 BC. So this is a very ancient system, and there are parallels around the world. I'm still just in Greece and in the Bible and in Egypt, but You can find this in the Maui stories. You can find this in China. So the turning away of his head when he kills the ram, this is the constellation Perseus. And this is Taurus, and this is Aries. So this is the ram, this is the bull, this is Perseus. He's right in between them. And the turning away of his head when he sacrifices is actually found in other myths as well. So here's Perseus. Actually, you can see the distinctive things about Perseus is he's got a twisted foot. You see how he has a twisted foot? So there are characters in the Bible whose foot get crushed against the wall when the angel is in their way. You guys know the story of Balaam? Balaam, there's angels in the way in his donkey. He's riding on a donkey. Perseus is right above Taurus. Anyway, he gets his foot crushed against the wall. Or there's Hephaestus. He gets his foot crushed by being thrown out of heaven. So Perseus is sometimes a figure with his foot twisted, but it could also be a figure with his feet crossed. See, if I cross my feet, you see how now my foot, it's not backwards anymore because I crossed my foot. But if I was just standing and my foot was going like that, you might say, oh, what happened to your foot? So Perseus, in some myths, his foot is crushed, but in some depictions, his feet are actually crossed. Whoops. Okay, well, I'll show you on that Odysseus. There's a figure right next to Odysseus with his feet crossed. This is actually from Mithraeum. There was a Mithras, the mysteries of Mithras. See how he's slaying the bull right here? And look, he's looking in the opposite direction. The way the Mithraeum always depicts Mithras is looking the other way, slaying the bull. Just like Circe told Odysseus, you have to look the other way. There's actually a scorpion right here. So that shows that we're talking about celestial things. As a professor named David Ulansey argued, hey, the Mithras symbolism is all about the sky. Here's one more. Maybe you can... This is another one of Mithras, but maybe you can see that, you see he always has his one foot kind of folded up onto the back of the bull and one foot extended, and he's always looking away, and he has this cape right here. Those are all characteristics of the constellation Perseus. So here in the Odyssey, I think we're talking about the exact same thing when Circe says, look away when you kill the ram, and here maybe you can see this figure has his legs crossed. This is one of Odysseus' companions. But in the ancient artists, this is about 450 or 430 BC. And he summons Tiresias, and then Tiresias gives him this prophecy and says, you need to carry your oar until you get to a place where people ask you, why do you have a winnowing fan? I don't know if you can see this. This is Easter Island. This is depicted in the 1800s. These chiefs, this is a dance that they would do with the idols at night with a cloud of smoke coming up, and the women are dancing, and these men are carrying these paddles, or these oars. It's like a symbol of chieftainship in the Easter Island culture, and I believe that probably relates to the same oar that we're talking about. They carry this symbolic paddle. It's just like Orion, just like that. But I'll show you a couple more from Greece, and then we'll move on here. This is one of my favorites, really. This is the goddess. Anyone know which goddess this might be? She's an archer. Artemis. Well, from ancient Greece, she was called Artemis, and then Diana in Rome. Which one were you saying? Oh, Hecate. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes. So actually, I believe she's a different constellation because she often has a torch. So I believe she actually corresponds to Virgo. There's a constellation above Virgo called Coma Berenices, which looks like a torch. But that's a good guess. But so Artemis is an archer goddess. But look at the angle of her body here. She's actually in the act of slaying Actaeon. This is a myth where Actaeon accidentally sees her while she's bathing. And usually she turns him into what? Anyone know? A stag. And then his own dogs tear him to pieces. These myths are kind of violent. But I believe they're all based on the stars. So I don't think he actually got torn to pieces by his own dogs. I believe this is teaching us something about actually spiritual truths, which we'll talk about in a minute. But this artist has chosen to depict him being torn apart by his own dogs, but really not turning into a stag. This is a very famous piece of artwork that you can see still today in Boston. There's a large bell crater. This is the name vase of the Pan painter, but it's a very artistically beautiful, I think, painting just with the dynamic action in the figures. And now look at the constellation Sagittarius in Scorpio. I don't know if you can see it with the light, but look at the angle of Sagittarius. Here's the bow of Sagittarius. Here's Scorpio. This is Actaeon being torn apart. He's got his arms thrown up in the air. You even have little, excuse me, curves of the tail of the dogs. I'll show it to you. I don't know if you can see them both together. I'll take a sip of water while you look at that. Down below, I put Sagittarius and Scorpio. Look at her, the length of her dress, the angle of her body, the height she's holding that bow. Like if it's Orion, the bow is usually in the ancient artwork held up like at full length, like this, right? But if it's a Sagittarius in the artwork, the bow is usually held like this because that's where it is in the sky. So can you see how Scorpio and Sagittarius? Okay, so hopefully I'm providing some evidence that the ancient artists knew this system. This is a worldwide system. You can see the same artwork like in Java and in India. Okay. I'll show you one more from ancient Greece. This is the charioteer, because I'll show you this one because it connects with ancient India as well. This is the figure of Boötes. He has this beautiful star Arcturus, and right in front of Boötes is the Big Dipper. Boötes is seated right here, and he's like a charioteer, and the Big Dipper is like his team of horses, okay? And behind him is Ophiuchus again, and this is the constellation Hercules. And these figures are just now coming into really good view in the night sky. So this is Hercules, this is the northern crown, and this little part of the sky is often depicted as, Boötes is often a charioteer, and let's take a look at Achilles dragging Hector. This is at the end of the Trojan War. Achilles is dragging the vanquished Hector behind his chariot. Again, it's very violent, but I believe this is all actually, I don't believe the Trojan War is meant to be a literal war. I believe it's a spiritual, it's about the interplay between the spirit world and the material world, as I'll talk about in a minute. But here is the charioteer. Notice he's kind of seated like Boötes. Look at this interesting figure right behind Achilles. There's a winged figure. You see how his legs are? Very distinctive. That leg pattern right there is right behind Boötes in the sky is Hercules, and that leg pattern matches Hercules. This is the outline of Hercules, according to H.A. Ray. This is the way I see him when I look in the sky. The other outlines that you'll see suggested for Hercules are not very good, and I think they're probably, they help you miss the connection to the stars. You see this deep knee bend? Now, in this case, usually Hercules, his main weapon was a big club, but in this case of that charioteer, he was depicted as having a wing. So that club could become a wing in some, like an angel. So a lot of angel figures, even when you see Gabriel announcing to Mary, it will often be in the outline, Gabriel will have a deep knee bend and his wing right over his back, just like Hercules. So this also relates to the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is the divine charioteer, and Ophiuchus, Krishna and Arjun, if you're familiar with the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is the charioteer for Arjun in this great battle. It's basically like the Trojan War, but it's in the myths of ancient India. And they have this banner or standard on top of their chariot of the god, anyone know who it is up there? Hanuman. It's kind of hard to see in this, but I'll show you another picture of Hanuman. So Hanuman, or Hanuman, is the monkey god. Is anyone familiar with Hanuman? He has a long tail. I'll show you some pictures of him, but I believe this cements my argument that Krishna is the charioteer corresponding to Boötes. Hanuman corresponds to Hercules. And in fact, there's other reasons to believe that, but here's not too visible with the black background, but here's Boötes, the Big Dipper, and Hercules is the Hanuman banner. Here's a picture of Hanuman, or Hanuman. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it exactly right, but you see the deep knee bend, and this is a sculpture, a pretty old one. It looks like it's been out in the weather and kind of a little faded, but can you see the position of his legs? It's just like Hercules. And here's another one. Oh, there's Hercules. And here's another sculpture of Hanuman. This one's pretty easy to see. Can you see that outline? Knee bend isn't as pronounced, but the good thing about this one is it has this huge mace. So the weapon that Hanuman uses is a mace, a big club. So just like Hercules. So Hercules figures usually have, you can tell them by their powerful weapon, like a thunderbolt, a club, a huge sword, or a mace. Okay. And there's that section of the sky again. So why do I think these myths are doing this? Okay? Like I said, I didn't even go looking for this. I was happily believing that the Bible was, something different from all the myths of the world. But actually, they are all using the same system. And I'll go to some Native American stories in a moment, some sacred traditions that also follow the same pattern in a moment. But I'm going to tell you why I believe they're doing this. I believe they're using the nature to teach us the fact that there is a spiritual world and a material world, and there's an interplay between them. Just like the stars and the sun, this is the east, because I'm looking towards the south. There's a little S right here. But when you're looking to see the zodiac in the northern hemisphere, you look towards the south. They rise in the east, they cross the sky, they set in the west. And it's just like us. We have a spiritual component and a physical component. And the world around us has a spiritual component and a physical component. But the modern world wants to deny that there's a spiritual component. In many ways, I think many of the problems we have is because we're divorced from this ancient wisdom. A lot of it because of the way that I think the Bible's been misinterpreted and gone around trying to stamp out the ancient wisdom. But this is another way of seeing it is the zodiac wheel. The top of the wheel, the upper part, is like the sunny summer parts. Here's the summer solstice. Then we plunge down into the lower parts, the winter solstice. Which side do you think would represent life? If one half is life and one half is death, would you think, I would think normally that, well, when we sink down into the lower half of the year, that must be death, right? The low, dark, no. That's where we are now. I got this insight from some writers, one named Alvin Boyd Kuhn especially. He passed away in, I think, 1963. But he says, look, you make a mistake if you think that the underworld is talking about the realm of the dead, like where we go after we die. Where you go after you die is the spirit world. That's the realm of the spirits, the realm of the gods. Where we are right now is we're plowing through this lower half. It's like when the sun pops up in the east, it sails through the sky. That's like spirit up there. There's no, but when it hits the western horizon, it sinks down into either the earth or the water, just like we have a body of clay, right? We're given this material. So the sun doesn't really plow under the ground, right? The earth is orbiting the sun, but it seems like it's plowing underneath the ground. It's going through the ground to pop up again. That's where we are. We're plowing through the underworld. We're passing through this world in this physical body, but we're supposed to be becoming integrated with the spirit world, and we're supposed to be recognizing the spirit world is here in this world everywhere that we are. That's what I think these myths are actually teaching. Like Samson is constantly forgetting his spiritual side and getting enmeshed in his physical side. Well, I'm the strongest guy. I can do whatever I want. I want that girl right there. And he gets his hair shorn off, right? It's like the sun, when it goes down to the winter solstice, his hair gets shorn off, just like the sun gets its rays, clipped because the sun is in its lowest half of the year. But it says, the very next verse in the Bible after Samson gets his hair shorn off, it says, but his hair began to grow again. And Samson isn't someone who lived thousands of years ago. I mean, maybe he is. If you believe that Samson lived thousands of years ago, that's great. But I also think Samson is each one of us. We got our hair shorn off. In other words, we're like the sun or the star that has been plunged down here, but we're actually from that world, and we have to elevate that. And that's blessing. Blessing is to elevate the spirit in ourselves and others, and cursing is to put people down and say, oh, you're just a body, or you're just a physical. Oh, I'm going to categorize you by your race or by your sex or whatever. That's just trying to force someone into just being purely material. And I think that all these myths are showing these truths in these ways. And I talk about that. This is my latest book. I want to thank Steve for his great line that I will now steal. I have a lot of million sellers as well. Millions of books in my cellar. Boxes of books in my cellar. But this is my latest one where I talk about that. And in that one, I try and talk about patterns that go across different traditions. In some of my previous books, I've looked just at ancient Greece or just at the Bible. But this one, I'm trying to go patterns that you see across different traditions. So this is the Orpheus myth, but it is very, very prevalent in North America. So does anyone know the story of Orpheus real quick? I'll move it along.
Which one, the whale or the...
You're right. There's lots of myths about Orpheus, but the one I'm talking about is Orpheus and his wife Eurydice. Eurydice is kind of how I used to pronounce it when I was little. I didn't know Eurydice, but apparently she steps on an adder, a poisonous snake, on the day of her marriage, and dies. And Orpheus is this great harpist. He's, everyone who plays stringed instruments are invoking the spirit world, right, because of waves. And Orpheus was this harpist who could even cause the rocks to start crying. He was so good at playing. So his beloved Eurydice, this is actually 1800s painting, but I thought it kind of captures a little bit the kind of the pathos of the story. But here's Orpheus with his harp, and he goes down to the underworld, and he begs Hades and Persephone, the god and goddess of the underworld, will you please let Eurydice come back? And they're so moved, they say, okay, she may come back, but one condition. Anyone know what it is? You can lead her out of the underworld, but do not look back. If you look back, then you don't trust us. You won't be able to hear her because she's still a ghost right now. But if you get her all the way back to the upper world without looking back, she can come back. And of course, he walks along. He's not sure if she's back there, but he keeps going. But at the very last step to get up to the upper world, he's worried that she might not be able to make the step. And he, kind of without thinking, and he's doubting, he turns around, and all he sees is a glimpse, and she disappears back. It's a horrible, oh my goodness. We find this pattern around the world. I call it the failed retrieval from the dead. You find it in the Norse myths with Balder. You find it actually in Japan. There's a story almost exactly like this. There's an ancient record called the Kojiki, where the god Izanagi goes to get Izanami, his sister, also his wife, from the underworld. And the same exact, almost, it's a failed retrieval from the dead. Well, it turns out, here's a couple more pictures of Orpheus, just real quick. That's a statue that someone did of him turning around. And she said, why did you turn around? And here's one actually from Egypt. That's Orpheus. You can tell by his lyre or his harp right there in between them. But this story, I believe, has a celestial. We're talking about, I believe, the same portion of the sky. Now we're almost done. So if you're, but it's the same portion of the sky. Sagittarius has this characteristic where it looks like it is going this direction, but it also seems to be looking back. Can you kind of see that in the outline of Sagittarius? Sagittarius looks like he or she is walking this way, but looking back this way. Just like in the story of Lot and Lot's wife, right? What was Lot's wife not supposed to do? Do not look back, or you will turn into a pillar of salt. Well, that scared me. When I was a little kid, I had this Bible with pictures, and there's Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt. It was kind of horrifying, but I believe it's the same looking back. And sometimes when he looks back in different myths, like in the Japan one, she is skeletal or covered with worms or maggots, which I think is actually Scorpio. Scorpio is often a worm or a snake. You're not supposed to look back. And I'll talk about the spiritual meaning of it in a minute, but this is actually a map of North America with all the different linguistic units of the different nations of North America. Unfortunately, you can't see it so well, but I will put this up on the internet. This story is very prevalent among the different nations of the Native American peoples. It is actually recorded in the 1600s among the Huron people, but it's recorded all the way out to the Northwest, the nations up in the Pacific Northwest, the Yokuts people in California, which is actually very close to where I live. I live near a a place called Painted Rock, which is attributed to Yokuts and Shumash. They have a version of it, Navajo, Comanche, all the way across. I referenced some of the books. I have a chapter on this in my latest book, but the very interesting thing, not only is it found in North America, but it was not brought here by missionaries or something. Because the very earliest people to come here were already saying, this is interesting, there's this Orpheus and Eurydice story. But that's not the only reason why we know it didn't come from Europe, because they have parts of this story that Greece doesn't have. In other words, there are aspects of this Orpheus and Eurydice tradition. It's all across North America with different variations. So in some variations of the story, excuse me, the beloved husband, or the husband of the departed, it's either a sister or a wife, even in the North American stories, has to cross this dangerous river. And the wife says, oh, don't follow me across that river. Like in some of the stories, she's still going down to the underworld. And she says, you can't follow me across that river. Living people who cross that river will fall in and turn into a salmon or turn into a fish. That's not in the Eurydice story, but it is in the sky. I'll show you in a second. It's the same part of the sky. Or in sometimes they can't look at when they bring her back, they can't look at her until like the animals all will do a ceremony to bring her back. If all the humans will not look while they do the ceremony. And of course, one human has to peek, and then she turns into a skeleton and goes back to the underworld. So it's always the same. It's like, why do they tell this horrifying story? I believe it is actually a picture of our condition. When we are trying to elevate our spirit, we can't doubt. It's like, don't turn back. You have to keep, you will have doubt, right? You'll be like, well, I believed in the spirit world yesterday, and it all sounded so good when I was at that festival, and now I'm here back at work, and it doesn't seem so real anymore. It's like you can't doubt, but we're going to doubt. There's lots of layers, I think, of meaning, but this is also on the turn of the year. It's actually, this is the part where the winter solstice happens, right here. The winter solstice happens in between Scorpio and Sagittarius. This is the lowest part of the year. This is the part in our lives, if we're the lower half of the year, where we start to turn back up. When we come down to this body, at first we're like a baby, and we don't even know there's a spirit. We're like checking out our body, and then we're, punching people or chasing girls or doing all these things that are not spiritual. And then we start to go, wait a minute, I think there's actually more to me than this. And we start to have this turn. Well, this story takes place at that turn. And it's about that raising back up. But it's a hard, there's going to be lots of failures along the way. And also, I think it shows that, we're not immortal. But anyway, there's lots of layers of meaning to the story. But interestingly enough, in the Native American traditions, they almost always have this river that you have to cross. I believe that's the Milky Way. I don't know if you can see it so well, but there is a great rift in the Milky Way. It's sometimes called the birth canal. In the Maya tradition, they talk about the birth canal in the great rift. Well, that's right in between Scorpio and Sagittarius. That's the second birth, right? That's the spiritual birth. In a lot of these myths, there's twins. In a lot of these myths, there's two mothers. Well, it can't really be easy to have a literal two mothers. Not too many people have two mothers here in the literal world. I mean, you might have two mothers kind of figuratively speaking, but no one has physically two mothers. I mean, born twice, right? Even Jesus gets asked that. Wait a minute, how do I go back in and be born again? And he says, no, spiritual birth. Second one's spiritual. This spiritual birth happens in the birth canal right here at the lowest part of the year. And there's actually a passage across the river, across the Milky Way. That great rift actually looks like a passage. That's actually, I believe, when the Red Sea is parted, I believe that's the passage, because right next to it is Ophiuchus with his rod out. I could go on and on, but the point is, the Native American traditions have actually preserved hundreds of variations of this Orpheus and Eurydice myth, story, that's found around the world, found in Japan, found in the version of Lot's wife. It's found in Scandinavia, Balder. But they have parts of it that the Greeks didn't have, or that the Scandinavians didn't have. I believe this shows that this came from some very ancient common source that we're all actually united. This actually unites all the people instead of divides them. Like, oh, I have to come here and change your beliefs because I have the Bible and you don't, so I have to change you. How wrong is that if they're all based on the same thing? So, I mean, they're all based on the same system, trying to teach these spiritual truths in all these different ways. It's like, oh, you didn't get it with that story? Okay, hold on. I've got another one for you. You didn't like Samson? Okay, let me explain it to you with Solomon. Solomon, almost like the opposite of Samson. Like, be like Solomon, don't be like Samson. But they're teaching you the same thing. It's about the interplay, I believe, of the spirit world and the material world. And the stars generally represent the spirit world. That's the realm of the gods. That's the realm of the spirits. And it is the infinite realm. When you look up into the stars, you are actually looking to infinity. So it's like the perfect, we cannot see the invisible world by definition, or you can if you've got special ability to go to that world. And there are people, some people have, I think everyone has some ability, but they're depicting it for us, this invisible world, with visible stars, invisible characters that represent things that we need to know. So I've already talked about, like, this is the turning point on the wheel. And it's the same thing, actually, in the Bible. Jesus kind of has two Marys who are, there's Mary, his mother, and then another Mary, and they're both there at the crucifixion. So I believe these are talking about not external people, but each one of our conditions. And so just to finish it off, we are here at a very special time of the year. They use this cycle of the year, all the cycles. They also use the lunar cycle to depict the same interplay between spirit and matter. They also use the precessional cycle, a very long cycle. They have all these different cycles, but there are many, many, many ancient monuments around the world that are aligned to the heavens, that might be aligned to the solstice, summer solstice, the winter solstice. Some will incorporate multiple, just like the Great Serpent Mound does. And I believe, remember in that story of Orpheus and Eurydice, or in all these other stories where you're bringing back the beloved from the dead, it's not like Orpheus goes down and says to the gods, give me back my wife, and I'll tell you, I want her back now. That never happens in these stories. The gods tell Orpheus what he has to do. Or in the Native American tradition, sometimes they have to go back and feed her a buffalo kidney, and I could show you that in the constellation of Ophiuchus. And you cannot touch her, or you cannot embrace her. And of course, the husband always ends up embracing her, and then he finds that she's turned into a rotten log or something, because he disobeyed the orders that came from the other world. So the point is, we're supposed to take our pattern from the invisible realm. We don't dictate to that realm, it dictates to us. We pattern our lives. Actually, when Steve was singing, he mentioned Lakota. The Lakota holy man Black Elk, Hahakasapa, he was the nephew of, his dad was the cousin of Crazy Horse, Tashunka Whitko. And he talked about the vision of Crazy Horse. The horse wasn't crazy, he explained. Crazy Horse in his vision went to the other realm, and he was on a horse, but the horse was kind of floating, and it was moving around in a different way, and everything was kind of shadows. And then Black Elk says something very interesting. He says, he was in that other realm, the real realm. That's the real realm, and everything here is like a shadow of that realm. And that's the same thing in the Greek myths and all the other, the gods and goddesses, you never say, oh, this woman is more beautiful than this goddess, because her beauty came from the gods. You never say she's more beautiful than the goddess, because that's putting the order wrong. We take our pattern from the other world. So these ancient sites around the world, I believe, are also trying to tell us we are supposed to be aligning ourselves with this spirit. We're supposed to be elevating our awareness of the spirit world in ourselves and as much as possible in others, and trying to lift them up in a positive way, not put them down. In the around the world, there's the pyramids are aligned. There's many solstice alignments with Stonehenge. This is actually, anyone know what this is? This is Göbekli Tepe, very ancient. Like we believe now, or archaeologists believe that it was finished by 10,000 BC. That means it's as ancient to the ancient Egyptians as ancient Egypt is to us. 10,000 BC is like 6,000 years before ancient Egypt. And ancient Egypt is like 5,000 or 6,000 years before us. So Göbekli Tepe aligned to the heavens and also has celestial patterns on there. So I'll finish up because I'm sure someone else is coming. But all these sites, oh, here's the Bighorn Medicine Wheel, or that's what it's often called, or maybe it is a more correct name for it, if Native Americans know. But the Bighorn Medicine Wheel is in Wyoming. It is aligned to all these different risings and settings of different stars. The Lakota people have a whole pattern of the year that they would go around. And it was centered on the Devil's Tower region, or what we call Devil's Tower. They call it something different. And here we are. So we are aligning our lives with the heavens by coming to these places, I believe, at these specific times of the year. We are acknowledging, hey, you know, the material world isn't all that there is, and we have to try and align ourselves more with it. And that's what I think these ancient myths are incredibly important to us and have a great message for us today. And unfortunately, I think it's much harder to hear what they're saying if you don't know the language they're speaking. And I believe that that language has actually been obscured, maybe even deliberately, by certain people who don't want you to know that it's based on the stars. There's some people who would be very resistant to the idea that the Bible is based on the same thing that the stories of Pacific Island cultures and Native America. It's like the shared precious inheritance of all humanity, and they all contain different clues and messages for us. And so I think we can appreciate them in a new light as we start to understand the language that they're talking to us. So thanks very much for listening, and I'm really happy to be here with you. I've never been here before. Thanks.